brand new module, and I've combined the first two lessons into one presentation. So you'll have one less activity to do this module because I'm combining two modules into one. So we're talking about a new place in the world, all right? And as you'll come to find, whenever we talk about a new place, we always have to talk about its geography first. Because geography is really important. Where you're from has a lot to do with who you are. Like, what's a big industry, or used to be a big industry in our area? Coal mining. Because we have what? We have coal located where? In what? Mountains. In mountains. We have mountains. Do you think the people in Kansas have a lot of interest in coal mining? Not really, because they don't have a lot of mountains. So really where you're from has a lot to do with who you are and the way you act. The ancient world and even today's world is no different. And the first ever civilization, which sprang out of the Neolithic Revolution, was in Mesopotamia. Now, the Mesopotamia is in an area which we refer to as the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent. What does the word fertile mean?
Like good stuff to plant in. Like
Yeah. Yeah, it's good for growing stuff. Okay? And then crescent. What's a crescent? Yeah, it's a shape like a crescent moon, crescent wrench, croissant. You ever eat a croissant? How are they shaped? Or a crescent roll? Yeah. And as you can see, it's kind of like a C. Like a C. Now, Mesopotamia is a Greek word. So it's a word that the Greeks assigned to the people that lived there long after the people were actually gone. Do you know what Mesopotamia means? Land between the rivers. Land between the rivers. Very good. And as you can see, there are two rivers that make up the Fertile Crescent. The Tigris and the Euphrates. Tigris and Euphrates. So these rivers, they flood at least once a year, and it's an unpredictable kind of flooding. And what happens when rivers flood? Like, you guys ever been to the Greenbrier or the New River after a flood? What's left behind? Debris. Sure. What else? You guys never had to clean up a cabin or something after a flood? Or a porch or anything? What's left behind after the water recedes back? Mud. A very thick layer of silt is left behind. But that silt is high in nutrients. And so what does that make this area? Good for farming. That's what makes it fertile. Okay? So, Fertile Crescent is fertile because it has two rivers that flood unpredictably. And when the rivers go back to normal, it leaves behind a nice, rich layer of silt, which is good for growing stuff in. Okay? But there are some problems with this geography. Problems with geography. First of all, this area of the world is still there today. What present-day country is the most of Mesopotamia in today? Does anybody know? Well,
Egypt.
Okay, Egypt will be right here. That's a good guess, though. It does start with an I. Iraq. So the present-day country of Iraq is actually the Fertile Crescent, where the areas of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers are. In your mind, I'm sure you've all heard of Iraq or seen pictures of it on the news. What does it look like? What is the geography of Iraq, just in your mind? When you think of Iraq, a person standing in Iraq, what are the surroundings like? Sand and desert. You don't think fertile. You don't think lush farmland. Well, that's because the areas in which the ancient people and present-day people were doing the farming had to be changed. They had to irrigate. They had to change the environment in order to make that land fertile. So there are definitely some problems that these people had to overcome from their geography. One, unpredictable flooding. They don't know when the river's going to flood. Unlike other rivers in the world that flood almost at the exact same day every year. Did you guys know that happened? There were certain rivers like that. Rivers that are affected by monsoon seasons. Our rivers in West Virginia flood unpredictably. We don't know when they'll flood or how much. It's unpredictable. In addition to the unpredictable flooding, they can have the opposite of too much water. What's the opposite of too much water? Drought. It is a desert. It's very sandy. Could be very dry for a long time. How can you overcome the problem of flooding or not enough water? How do you overcome the water problem? Yeah, you can divert the flow of those rivers. Irrigation. Irrigation is one of the ways that they are able to divert river water and overcome problems with geography.
So just irrigation?
Irrigation can solve both because excess water will be irrigated away and then you're bringing water to places that need it. Okay? Another problem that the ancient Mesopotamians had with their geography is they had no natural barriers for their protection. No natural barriers for protection. Meaning what? What kind of protection they need?
Like no dunes, like at the beach.
Okay.
Like, mountains that people can't invade them.
Makes it tougher for people to get to them. Because this is the first ever civilization where people are settling down and farming. Does that mean that there are other people in the surrounding areas that are still nomads? And how do they live their life? Yeah, like I'm going to come to your city and bonk you on the head and take your stuff. And what was going to stop them? Was there going to be mountains they had to cross? Or enormous deserts they had to? Or even enormous rivers? They didn't have any of those natural protections. So what did they do to overcome and to create a barrier? Any guesses? They built walls. They lived behind cities that had large walls. Large walled cities for safety. Like, yeah, we're going to put all of our crops in here. We'll store all our grain. We're going to keep all our people. And if you want to come get us, you gotta come over this wall. It seems like a simple thing, but it's very effective. Very effective. There are even political leaders today that believe in building walls. All right. What's another problem with the geography of Mesopotamia? Limited natural resources. What's a natural resource? What's a natural resource? Stuff you find in nature that can be replenished. That's a natural resource. So things like, if you think about what Mesopotamia looks like, you think of trees. No, of course not. There's not a lot of trees. Do you need to have some lumber to build walls and to build your city? Well, how do you get it? How do you overcome not having any trees? Because you have to have trees to build your city. Well, you could try to plant your own. Trade. They are going to engage in commerce and trade in order to get the things they need. It's like, yeah, we don't have a lot of trees, but we do have a lot of grain. So we'll trade you some grain for some lumber. They just traded to get what they needed. Now this seems pretty simple, but this was the first time in human history that this had ever happened. Okay, so it's a big deal. All right. So as we go further with Mesopotamia, Mesopotamia is a big area. It's a large area. All right, it's all the land between two rivers. But there are different parts to Mesopotamia. Think of it like the United States. It's a big area. Within the United States, there's different areas. There's 50 states. West Virginia is one of those states. We're broken into 55 counties. Every county is broken into different districts or cities. Cities are broken down in different neighborhoods or wards. Wards are broken down in different streets. Streets are broken down in different houses. Houses are broken down in different rooms. So we're constantly breaking down into different smaller subgroups. Mesopotamia had 3 general areas: Assyria, Akkad, and Sumer. Assyria, Akkad, and Sumer are the 3 general areas. Okay? Each of these are city-states. Do you guys remember from your vocabulary what a city-state is? Who can tell me the definition of a city-state? Go ahead, Grace.
A city and all its surrounding land.
That's right, a city and it's all of its surrounding land. So it's usually the walled area where everybody lives and then the farmland that surrounds it. That's a city-state. So each of these city-states have cities within them, okay? And each was ruled in pretty similar ways. So when it came to who's in charge of a city, we have to come up with what is those complex institutions, like how we're going to control and have rules and laws. What's that called? Government. The type of government that the Mesopotamians used is called a theocracy. Theocracy, not democracy, not monarchy, not anything. It's a theocracy. What is theocracy? What is theocracy?
Government where rule comes from the divine authority.
Very good, thank you. A government where rule comes from a divine authority. What does the word divine mean? Divine. Any guesses?
Like ultimate, like
Ultimate.
Proper.
Okay.
Godly.
Godly. That's what I'm looking for. A supernatural authority. Godlike. Okay? Yes, there were people in charge, but those people either ruled through God or the gods ruled through them. That's a theocracy. Okay? It's a government by divine authority. So, when it comes down to it, there would be one person in charge, a king. Okay? And that king would operate the daily things in the city, the daily, day-to-day operations of the city. Okay? But that king's authority came from the heavens, or gods or goddesses, or even thought that he was a god himself. As long as there's some sort of religious aspect where that person is seen to rule with help or through the gods, through supernatural means. Okay? Were kings powerful? Very powerful. They were the most powerful people in the city-state. They led armies. They ordered the walls to be built, or maybe ordered the walls to be built higher. They oversaw construction projects like buildings and temples. They guided irrigation projects. Now, don't get me wrong. They're not doing any of the work. They're making other people do the work, but the work gets done because of their authority. All right? Does this make sense? So it's a theocracy. So with all these things that the king is doing, is religion important to the people of Mesopotamia? I would say religion's important to every culture that we will ever discuss, and even your own culture, whether you are religious or not. But in every culture, religion is important, just as it was to the Mesopotamians. Now, you can't read this chart at all. And that's kind of my point. They had over 3,000 gods and goddesses. 3,000 gods and goddesses. So their religion believed in multiple gods and multiple goddesses. Thereby, what would we define their religion as? Polytheistic. Polytheism is simply the belief in many gods, or more than one even. If you believe in two, you're polytheistic. But the Mesopotamians had thousands of gods and goddesses. So, What do these gods and goddesses do? What was their... Why have 3,000? Why not 5?
They all had different
They all had different what?
uses.
They different jobs, different roles, and those roles were to do what? That's right. You're exactly right. Very good, Dakota. The purpose is to explain the workings and forces of nature. That's what their job is. Is it their job to bring people to salvation? To save people's souls? Is that the job? No. There is no salvation. That doesn't exist in Mesopotamian religion. Okay? That's not what their purpose is. Their purpose is to explain where the sun goes every night. Or why, how come I have this emotional feeling towards somebody else? Things that cannot be rationally explained. Okay? So, they were chosen and created to represent the forces of nature. For example, one of these gods, his name was Enlil, E-N-L-I-L, Enlil. And he was the god of storms and air and wind. That's what his job was. So when the wind blew really hard, Enlil's doing it. He's angry. Or if it's a nice, beautiful, calm day with no clouds, Enlil's very content and happy. We must be doing something right, honoring Enlil. And that's how polytheistic Mesopotamian religion worked. Okay? Now, when it came to human beings, what the human role was toward the gods and goddesses, humans were nothing but servants. Humans were beneath the gods and underneath them. So the gods were seen to control all aspects of human life. And it was the humans' role to give them worship, to give them honor, to give them sacrifice. That's what humans did. And that was the relationship between humans and the gods. Okay? To be servants. Does this make sense? And it was the gods were believed to control everything that we couldn't understand. Love, weather, earthquakes, natural disasters, love, marriage, disease, even bad luck and good luck. There were gods for all of these things. Okay? Peyton, you okay? Okay, next. Okay, so it's not too long before these city-states that were living peacefully on their own, they get a little jealous of one another. Let me answer the phone. Hello? Hello? Hey. Okay, cool. Tramadol? That was it. That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so eventually these empires emerge, okay? Because the city-states are constantly living in conflict and violence. Why don't they just get along? Why can't you have your stuff and I have mine and we live in peace and you live in peace? Well, they're fighting over it. What's so bad that they got to kill each other over it? Say it again? Okay, they're definitely going to fight with each other over the land that's good for farming. So they want control of land. And what else is necessary for that land? Water. Land and water. Control of land and water is what the very first ever wars were fought over. Land and water. Earth and water. So the very first ever city-state to go conquer another city-state and become an empire were the Akkadians. So the very first ever empire in human history were the Akkadians. And the person, the king of Akkad, who set forth this in motion and became the first emperor ever, his name was Sargon. We believe that this is like a bronze casting of his face, Sargon, there in the top right corner. Now, Sargon he was the very first ever emperor, and he did so by conquering another city-state. And then when you do that, you create a large political unit, and that's what an empire is: more than one city-state under one ruler. That's an empire. Okay. Obviously, we don't know. There's no Akkad today because they, just like what happens, they get conquered themselves. They get conquered by a city-state called Babylon, or the Babylonians. So, constantly fighting with one another, and the majority of the fighting occurred because everyone wanted to have control of the most land and the most water, particularly the prime land. It was good for farming. Okay? The Akkadians did create the first empire under Sargon, and they were eventually conquered by Babylon, the Babylonians. All right, I'll give you guys a second to write that down. All right, moving right along. All right, so after the Babylonians take over and they create their own little dynasty, meaning power being passed down from generation to generation. Eventually, one of the emperors wants to create a code of laws for everyone to live by. And that person's name was Hammurabi. Hammurabi. And the code of laws in which Hammurabi has created is called the Code of Hammurabi. The Code of Hammurabi. You guys ever heard of this before?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So the Code of Hammurabi was created around 4,000 years ago. So it's pretty old. Around 1792 BC. 1792 BC. And there were 282 laws. Just a list of laws. 282 of them. These pictures you see here, this is the same thing. Both sides are the same thing. This is a stone carving written in cuneiform. Thank you so much. Written in cuneiform. And this was located in Babylon. What do you think is written on this stone? The laws. All 282 of them are written on this stone. And this is supposed to be Hammurabi himself, engraved into the stone. All right. What do you think? Do you think these laws are easy to follow, hard to follow? Do you think there's, if you break one, it's you just get a slap on the wrist, or what do you guys think? Take some guesses. Think like a historian. Okay, very strict. Yes. What about the punishments for breaking them? Very also strict. So if we were to characterize the Code of Hammurabi into one word, we would say very strict. It's a strict code of laws. And this code of laws was based on revenge. Revenge. How's that a little bit different than how our code of laws are set up in America? Are our laws based on revenge? Not really. Our laws are based on justice. Theirs were not. Based on retaliation. So, let's say, I'm walking down the street and I see Jana. Jana's mad at me because of something I did. She comes up and punches me in the face. All right? Knocks me down. I'm unconscious. I'm crying. She's really hurt me badly. Okay? So I would go to the authorities and I would say, Jana punched me in the face. And they would say, okay, looks like you got a big bruise. You've been crying. You're obviously a very weak man. We're going to take care of this for you. And so they go find Jaina, and what's her punishment going to be? They're going to retaliate. They'll probably punch her in the face about 5 times. Retaliation. All right? So that's a very simple, basic idea of how this is going to work. But it wasn't that cut and dry, okay? Because, Jaina and I, we are seen in America, we are the same under the eyes of the law. That wasn't so in Mesopotamia. Different social classes had different standings. So, for example, let's say that Jaina is a high-class member of society, and I am a low-class member of society. And Jaina punches me in the face, and so then I go to the authorities, and I say, Jaina punched me in the face. And they say, good. We're glad she punched you in the face. Whereas if I'm the lower class of society and she's the upper class, and I punch her in the face, I will probably either be executed or have my arm cut off or beaten severely. So even though it's based on eye for an eye and revenge and retaliation, there is a certain social order to it based upon how high you are and how low you are. So it's not based on justice. It's not fair. It's not equal. It's just based upon retaliation. That's the fundamental aspect of it. Public officials also have a very different role under the Code of Hammurabi. Let's say that I go home today after, here in America, I go home and I found that my house has been broken into and my TV's gone and I've been robbed. Who am I going to call? The police and Ghostbusters, right? I'm going to call the police, and the police are going to come, and they're going to do an investigation and take my number and find out all the things that were stolen, and then hopefully they can find it, all right? And then what happens if they don't find it? Don't find my stuff? What happens to the police officers? Nothing. It's their job to go find it. That's not so under the Code of Hammurabi. They didn't have police like we have, but they had authorities. And if somebody comes and I come home after work one day and I find that all my possessions are stolen, I call the authorities in Mesopotamia and they do an investigation. They have to find my stuff. If the authorities cannot find my stuff, guess what they have to do? They have to replace it themselves. It's their job to replace my stuff because their job is to catch the bad guy. All right? So, and this applied not just to, it applied to a lot of different aspects of life in Mesopotamia. If my job is to build houses, and I build a house, and I don't do a very good job, and the house collapses and kills your family, guess what's going to happen to my family? They're going to kill all my family under the Code of Hammurabi. Okay? Revenge, retaliation. So they hold people to a higher standard. People that build houses, people that do things, okay? Public officials were expected to catch criminals. It's the government's responsibility to do that. There was also a large portion of the Code of Hammurabi dedicated to marriage and how you would get married. Now, it's unlike marriage in the ancient world is unlike marriage in the modern world. Parents arranged all marriages for their children, boys or girls, it didn't matter. You guys cool with that? Mom and dad get to pick who you marry? You don't like that idea? Why not? Well, they didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice who you married. It was up to mom and dad under the Code of Hammurabi. Usually it's dad that picks. If dad allows mom input, then that would be up to dad. But usually it's dad that arranges everything. Okay? So a lot of different aspects and a lot of different moving parts to the Code of Hammurabi, but it's just basically a code of strict justice on how you should live your life. All right? So questions on the Code of Hammurabi or Sumer, Mesopotamia? Okay, the next couple, or tomorrow, when you guys aren't here, we'll have activities. So you can work in your workbook. If you do it in your workbook, submit it in PDF form. Does everybody know how to do that? You use the scan function in the Notes app. Okay? And then the next couple days after that, we're going to do Egypt. Egypt's a pretty big lesson, so it'll take us a couple days. So Friday, I may be in here talking to myself, but putting a video on YouTube. Okay? So questions on Sumer, Mesopotamia, theocracy, empires, polytheism, the geography of Sumer. All right. If you have questions, don't hesitate to ask.